You're about to enter here a new portal's adventure where David Price Francis and I, are journeying in an unplanned, spontaneous way to explore an idea that we stumbled upon and we're deciding to embark on. And we said, let's do a spontaneous overture, kind of introductory recording. And we are tracing and traversing all over the place. But the unified theme that we are exploring is a three-step system of the exoteric, mesoteric, esoteric, and how the study of those lands and those domains of living, especially when we come closer to the esoteric core, how critical and how important that is through this time of crisis and transformative change for humanity. So come discover with us. Welcome to this journey. Welcome to Portals of Perception. Portal is a threshold, an entrance, a way in, and an opening. And today we are starting a new adventure, an adventure we call current openings, what the world doesn't quite get yet. I'm here with my good friend, David Price Francis. And David founded Energy Worlds together with his partner, Joanna Infeld. He is the author of Partners in Passion and of Go with the Glow. He is a spiritual teacher and a personal growth and transformation expert, helping individuals, couples, and groups improve the quality of energy in their lives and relationships. So we were actually musing here, planning how to approach this adventure we are embarking on, and we spontaneously decided to turn the recording on, and instead of developing our approach offline, actually do this live and explore what is the idea behind current openings, what the world doesn't quite get yet. So David, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Aviv. It's great to be with you. And I think of you both as a friend and a colleague. We've been working along in different trajectories, in different ways. I know you've been working intensively with leadership in corporations and business and have a high profile there. I've been working more with individuals and family settings and relationship settings. But it would be great to open up these territories together and discover what is current. Even the idea, as we spoke about, the idea of being current and how current has an electrical charge with it, and to see what's charged with between us today.
What becomes conductive in current openings that leads the way. So by way of getting to know you and your work just a little, how would you describe broadly your areas of interest and passion and focus?
I was thinking of this a little further before we began this call today. I think the simplest way to express it is that I've been kind of chasing, researching, pushing, pulling, needing. What is the truth of human existence on this planet? What are we at? And how the evidence about that truth is to be located. That is, there's so many opinions out there of so many different kinds. I think there's an old Chinese saying, opinions are like rice bowls, everybody's got one. At least that's the polite version of that saying. And to get to the evidence which can actually help us toward what the world doesn't quite get yet, because it's got to be evidence-based. It's got to be based in how the universe actually works. And I've been researching just recently the idea of the logos and the original meaning of that, which was the active reason pervading and animating the universe. In recent years, it's just become, the study of something. But when you go back to its origin, 300 BC, I think it was, long time ago. It is actually to do with the active spirit. I think of it as the laws, the natural laws that work throughout the universe. And those, I believe now at this stage in my study, they have to be our first point of exploration, is what those laws are. We each have our own individual psyche inside of which we can think what we want. We've been given that permission. And the root of psychology, I know it's a big favorite of yours also, is, does a person want to be more, we got psycho or logical? But psyche is more what our personal bias might be, but logical is to do with connecting into that original logos, the universe. And that, I believe, is where the truth of human existence is to be found. And that's a bit of a facing study, because often it can demonstrate our opinions to be not accurate, or our theories to be not accurate. So that's become the crux, I'd say, of my work with couples, individuals, groups, is try and get closer to the truth. Because once we got to the truth of a relationship, let's say, then we can work on what's the energies present in that relationship. And just one more thing on that. The reason that the book Partners in Passion was called that is based in realizing that we really need to understand the role that energetics play in human behavior, human psychology. Because when two people come together, we're doing it right now, we literally pass ions backwards and forwards. And when we look up the word ion in the dictionary, it says a positively or negatively charged particle. So Partners in Pass Ion was a play on that idea that according to the energies two people flow backwards and forwards between each other, that creates the third field, which is the crux of their relationship. And that's the core of that concept of that book.
So you already seeded there 6 or 7 huge big territories that we will look to bring, each one of which to a separate current openings episode. You brought the big T word, truth, and it's a courageous move to talk about truth in a post-truth era. You brought spirit, you brought logos, you brought relationship, and there was 1 or 2 psyche and psychology. So each one of these could be in the future a space, a domain we go deep into in a current openings. So perhaps we can talk a little bit how we intend to do this, how we intend to travel into these spaces, and what is the brief we are generating for ourselves. Now, I'm famous for, I've made a career out of creating for myself impossible briefs and then embarking on the journey of bringing these briefs to life, only to fall on my face and pick myself up and learn in the process. And so that's all right if it happens here again, if we fall on our faces and we pick ourselves up and we learn through the journey, that's quite all right. And so the way I am imagining this is that we are going to try to create conversations that will become accessible and valuable to imaginary 3 sisters sitting around the table with us. And that those 3 sisters will each find something in the conversation for them. So the first sister, it's what do we call them? The Erics?
The 3 Erics, yes.
The 3 Erics sisters. So the exoteric sister, the mesoteric sister, and the esoteric or esoteric sister, and such that wherever we go into a space, a domain, we travel all the way to the esoteric space to visit with Sister Eso, and then we trace back, not because we need to prove anything, but because we want to include her 2 sisters, 2 younger sisters in the conversation. And another way to maybe talk about these three sisters is, so the exo sister, she's the beginner. She just is waking up to the bigger questions of life and living and purpose and meaning, and to the fact that there is much more to life than what is often talked about in many places. Her just a little older sister, the meso sister, she's on a journey. She's been on a journey for a while. She certainly experienced transformational moments in her life. She attempted to explore different paths. She is engaged with a variety of practices. Yeah, she had something powerful already touching her life. And she is open to search for more. And her older sister Eso, the esoteric sister, she is, you could say, if not fully initiated, she's living an eminent life, a life that seeks to forever be in touch with the somewhat hidden, concealed reasons for things and where they emerge, the original point of issue. And I'm listening to what I'm saying, and I know we would need to trace and explain some of that and separate in a minute or two between esoteric thinking and conspiratorial thinking, and why sometimes they get confluenced together or brought together, but why they mean different things. But what I imagine in this challenging brief for us, because you in one way and I am in another way, adjacent ways, we've been on this journey for, depends how you count it, 3, 4, 5 decades, to reveal a little something about our age here. and when you or I, when we used to do workshops with people, say 35, 40 years ago, often there would be something that you'd feel like you need to prove something. I want us to be completely free from that. There's nothing that needs to be proven now. We are relaxing into this experience of now speaking from the eldering end of the journey. And at the same time, we want to find a way to be inclusive for anybody seeking to genuinely discover for themselves what is the truth for them. So how is this landing with you? What would you add or reframe?
Yes, it lands well, Aviv. And particularly in relation to that, the journey toward that esoteric, that core sister, is the journey toward greater truth, as I see it. So it totally fits with that idea of what is the truth of human existence. And something that goes with that, from my own experience, is there's increasing evidence to support it. So to me, that's a big difference between real esoteric core matters and conspiratorial thinking. So conspiratorial thinking will drum up, try and create evidence, invent. I love the way you use the word original, because original being of the origin, what's authentically there. And then there's all kinds of invention, which then is, to me, it's almost outside the exoteric. It's kind of sprinkled around the outside there. And so the more one moves through those levels, the simpler it gets, curiously enough, as well, in many ways. It's more complex, like trying to understand the workings of a foot with all of its many, many bones is way more complex, I believe, than when it comes to understanding some more of the core features, energetic features of the human. So as we get closer to the core, it can actually get simpler. So also as a word of encouragement, it isn't that we're going to start heading into complex mathematical formulae as we head toward the esoteric. It can actually get simpler. So to say that.
And the other distinction we ought to be offering about that difference between conspiracy thinking and esoteric thinking is why I actually mention them one next to the other is because sometimes the reason people conflate them, or actually that is what gave a rise to the word conspirituality, is the idea that in both of those different explorations we are seeking something that people feel that is concealed. So that's why there may be sometime temperamental adjacency. But I think it's fair to say that conspiracy is something that you imagine some people somewhere conspired to do, to come together, to benefit themselves, and therefore they developed a plot, a manipulative plot, or even evil plot, and they work very, very hard to conceal it. And by the way, with my experience over the last 3 decades working with some of the most admired companies in the world, I will simply say that most conspiracies could never get off the ground, which is why a lot of them would be a simple hype. Why? Because the premise that's always ignored in anybody that is into any major developed conspiracy, there is a premise that the people involved could actually get the competence to produce what you ascribe they produced, which is, when we look at how fragile and incompetent large systems and organizations in the world are, and again, I've worked the highest level of business with very successful companies with great organizational culture and ethos, and they still struggle. So there is a dual premise that for a conspiracy to become actualized, you'd need to pull together this extraordinary competence, and then you'd need to have this complete, total, global, distributed secrecy. Two premises that once out of a million would be perhaps plausible, but even there, highly unlikely.
Conspiracy would be, the idea of conspiracy would be at that exoteric level. It's like street level. It's like trying to find a cause for something, but putting it at the door of other people. So conspiracies, like you said, they always involve other people, some kind of cabal of other people doing something. The esoteric, I think of, is looking to find the universal laws, which are above human. They come from a source which is something that is built into our very lives. Like there's 8 billion people on the planet, and we all have certain features in common, which are fundamental. Those tend to get taken for granted, and then everyone's looking at the differences. But if we look at what's actually similar between us, like if, take the example, if we took our 2 livers out and put them on the table, it'd be very hard to tell the difference. So our fundamental human systems work by very, very same frequencies. And I think this would take us into other big topics, but like Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine systems, the Ayurvedic systems, Western medicine, they're all based on the idea that the human system runs on certain definite energy signals and also laws. And I think of natural laws as always accompanied by energy. So they're not like laws in a law court human made. They're always accompanied by the energies that animate them and cause them to live. So they're living conduits of connection and conductivity, and that's not the stuff of conspiracy theory, or the other side of that, what I call conformity theory. Because you got your conspiracy theory on the one side, and the conformity theory is say that's conspiracy, and the conspiracy guys go that's conformity. I'd say I'm trying to find my way up the middle and not go with either of those sort of polarities.
And so the other distinction we make there is that the reason people sometimes would be prone to explore conspiracies is because of the sense of being disenfranchised or overwhelmed or being confused or being simply feeling that their life is not in their control. So there is a psychological need to gain control by telling a story, because even if I don't have control of my life, but I can tell a story, then psychologically I fashion something that provides me the sense that I'm in control of something. Whereas yes, what you're describing in the sense of esoteric thinking and the study of natural laws and universal principles that work through all systems, there is an important inquiry here. So let me frame this and give you the chance to respond, because a lot of the time this is what I anticipate that we will be doing. I'll be framing some questions and you'll offer a journey, and I will sometime be stopping you mid-sentence and asking you to explain how do you mean this word or this term, such that we bring sisters exo and meso with us into the journey. So when we say esoteric, we do mean that something has been or is concealed. And one way to think into it is that it's not concealed because anybody is hiding that from anybody, but it's concealed because we have not trained our perception, and or we were conditioned into a frame that excludes that. What else would you say to offer a definition of what is esoteric, who is Sister Eso, and why is she Eso?
Right. So I'd go with the name portals of perception on that one, which is that, let's take the fact of us talking right now, and both of us, this is something a person does have control of. It's like a person may feel disenfranchised, unempowered, and yet they can use their eyes to see. They can use their ears to hear. They can move their arms, can move their legs, mostly, with a few exceptions. But we are in control of everything the universe gave us to be in control of. So that's first principles. And I think of esoteric as first principles. Like why are our eyes placed as the highest holes in our head? It's amazing. You look at our system, the mouth takes in solids and liquids and gases. Lowest hole in the head goes down into our combustion chamber. The nose takes in gases. You don't want to feed liquids in here, right? It takes in gases down into the lower part of our system. But then we get to our ears and our eyes. They're pulling in electrical impressions straight into our head. This, to me, is core esoteric evidence of how the human is designed, but it mostly gets taken for granted, because then what happens is a person says, yeah, I got that. Now I need to get a job. Or yeah, got that. But what movie am I watching tonight? So the temptation is to get distracted away from the esoteric into what's Vogue magazine putting out this week, or what's the latest thing. These days you pick up one of these and it's the biggest distraction device there is. So it's like you pick up your phone and news is coming at you. It's like, oh, I should know about that. Well, not necessarily. This is mostly a medium for the exoteric with a bit of mesoteric, but you're unlikely to find so much of the asking oneself the question like children do. Why am I here? That's the question that kind of gets pushed down a bit, usually by the adults, because no one quite knows the answer. Those are the great questions. So I think in that regard, the esoteric is deepening into the original human fabric, the original universal fabric. The mesoteric then writes theses about it, and the exoteric makes the exoteric has opinions about it, usually opinions about the mesoteric. So I think of it in those three layers in that sense. And the exoteric is mostly running on a shorter time frequency. I think of it in terms of, it's interesting with money. Money, I think of money as another energy, but human-made. And so the day laborer kind of looks at life one day at a time, or the idea of getting a weekly payment. I remember my mother coming from Wales. My grandfather used to work in the quarry in Wales, And so she told me in the village, the big thing was like, ooh, he's a salary man. He gets paid by the month. That was a big deal. And so that would be mostly the mesoteric, the professor, the teacher would have, instead of a day or a week, would be looking a month ahead. The esoteric, we're more long-term. It's looking at the long term of life, investing in what are you investing your time and energy into. And I think the esoteric in that sense is fascinating in terms of world history, world religions, groups of people who've been trying to accelerate their development. They've been doing so for esoteric reasons, which they've not been trying to keep hidden, but mostly the world's been too busy doing other things. Like if you don't have enough food to put on the table, that tends to be the main focus. If you can't put the money together for rent this week or for the mortgage or whatever the case is, that tends to eat up most of a person's time. So the esoteric calls for a different alignment, which is saying, I've got to manage the exoteric. I need to manage more the mesoteric, and I'm going to get at least some time into the core purpose of why am I here, and where did I come from, and where am I going to? It's like I've done this often. I'm sure with groups of people, and you say, where were you all 100 years ago? People are like, and then the next question, of course, is where will you be in 100 years' time? And then it's like, oh yeah, we don't know. That's the esoteric. That's the core stuff of living.
You also offer that the moment you ask the question why, you're actually potentially beginning to engage first principle thinking and the esoteric. And I've had our granddaughter with us for a 3-day weekend here last weekend, and she's 2.5 years, and so she's into the early why phase, and I could hear a few of her why questions.
Yes.
Why do we need to wear underwear? why do we need to go to nap at noon? These are good questions. So, but what you're saying is that for one reason or another, those why inquiries, they are conditioned out of us. So one reason you're saying is because we get distracted with all the noise around us. Second is we get distracted with the exigencies of life, put food on the table and pay the mortgage and these sorts of things. And potentially there are other reasons, not conspiratorial reasons, but the economic, materialistic, industrial complex and a media industrial complex, and the capture it provides by essentially in this time in what we call the attention economy. You'd say in some ways it's more difficult to find silence, to find space, to find a way to sense deeply into these inquiries and domains. And at the same time, we are seeing with people young and old that there is an even greater urgency because of what's happening at this time on this tormented planet to regain, rediscover first principle thinking and esoteric grounding. What else would you offer as to why we are embarking on this adventure now, and why we're looking to, why for you there is an impulse to engage in this experiment that we call current openings?
I think twofold. One is continuing the journey so we can share understandings together and open up new intelligence. Because one thing I found is when working with someone else on the journey, then new intelligence can actually drop in for reasons that we'll get into over other current openings, I think. So that's one aspect. And the other is in sharing, because we've been on a journey, both in our both in our own ways, but it's a journey toward that core, I would say. And so part of what then, to me, is incumbent upon us with that, and also because I want to, is to share some of the fruits of that research, which are hard to find. Like it's not easy to find a journey which is based in first principles, which hasn't been claimed in some way. So that's where the mesoteric sister, there's a lot of claiming, is how I see it. Like
say more how you mean claiming.
People identifying with certain modalities, whatever they may be, and then claiming themselves to be a master of this or a master of that, or, I'm a trained whatever avatar, I'm a trained, I won't get into each name, not to be offensive, but people build identities upon certain practices. So they'll say, well, I'll just give one actual example. I'm a Reiki master. Well, just taking the word, what does Reiki mean? It means universal energy. Well, I've been at this 40 years and I would not claim to be a master of universal energy. It's a kind of an outrageous claim to make. The person will then say, well, no, it's just a brand. Well, the meaning is universal energy. So that gets to be an obstruction, because once a person thinks they are a master of something, it tends to block off other perceptions. So to me, it's being prepared to have humility and being open to new first principle perceptions, which means that new connections are possible. And the world, as you said, the world doesn't quite get it yet. I'll give one more example, which is a friend of mine told me recently that he's been practicing Buddhist meditation for years, and he does healing work. And he says, but the stipulation is he always has to do it, or he always does it in the name of Buddha. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. That's like in Christianity, it always has to be in the name of Christ. But Christ didn't say, well, in the name of me. And Buddha didn't say, well, in the name of Buddha. They were connecting to first principle energies and the laws that are connected with those energies. And it doesn't need to belong to any particular brand name. So I think that's where the mesoteric has a lot of claiming in it, whether it's by religions or by particular brands of philosophy. I'll just give one further example at the level of exercise, which is many people go and practice Pilates. Pilates is a well-known practice, but Joe Pilates didn't call it Pilates. He called it muscleology, which is that was the name of his practice, which was trying to discover how to work with every single muscle independently. And that was the name he gave his work. But then it became branded with his name by other people. And it's interesting how we tend to personalize things and then claim by that personalization. So it's also getting past that mesoteric sister is saying, well, no claim. This is trying to get to the truth as it actually is. We don't need to put our particular name upon it.
And literally every moment in this conversation is seeding a potential conversation to go deeper on any of those items, but to just stay with the overarching theme of that last thing you said, because somebody could challenge you and I, what is our authority, and why do we present ourselves as quote unquote masters, and to which you're saying we are not. We're presenting ourselves from the authenticity of our experience and the fruits of our individual and collective journeys and inquiries. And we are still coming at this as pilgrims on a journey, learning. And that's actually the brief to spend time to the rest of your planetary journey. Ideally, on your last day here on Earth, you're still engaged in inquiry. And why, that is a subject for a whole other episode, and how we will get to that. But is there anything else you'd say? Well, I read on your bio on your website that you present yourself as a master of some kind. So how do you mean what you said there, and why is it indeed that there is such a claiming and a personalizing and identity branding? Why is that such a big issue, and why are we trying to skate through that?
Yes, it's a really good point. That in the mesoteric presentation, it's very hard. I think in that system, the 3-step system, it's very hard for to be in more than 2 parts at one time. So if someone is coming from the exoteric, they're looking for somebody who can say, well, I'm qualified in this. That's where that idea of, master of certain practices comes from. It's when it enters the head of the individual that they really are that. So I can say, well, I've been working with energetics for 40 years. That gives me a certain practical application of that work. So there's a level of mastery compared to someone who's never engaged with that work or engaged minimally. But when it comes to the esoteric, it's like going from 40 years as a qualification to the exoteric into, there's no knowing what new knowledge and understanding is going to come in today. So in that core chamber, it is stepping into the unknown.
So we always there skate beyond what we know to the open inquiry, to where is it appearing today, to how is it shape-shifting and ready to inform us today. And part of the premise for us is that this really is the core idea of portals of perception, actually skating to that end. And the other reason we are embarking on this journey here today is the sense that so much of that new order of intelligence and update to the human operating system as a whole, with distribution to all the core domains of life, from education to commerce to how families can evolve, to all the way to large institutions. The entire substrate of society is at a, we often talk about it as the complexity wall that presented itself with the meta crisis. But what it really means is that we have reached a certain obsolescence point. The operating system that created modernity and permitted postmodernity has now reached a point that it needs to be updated. It cannot be updated by the powers to be, by any existing structure. It actually needs to emerge inside out through people in all places, in all domains, inquiring and seeking to get in touch with the possibility that's emerging now. And part of the premise for us in current openings is to be on that current, to become open and available for that intelligence to access us in the domains that we are seeking to proffer as part of this inquiry.
Yes. So if we were to think, well, we've already made it, like we're talking as two, as they call them in Britain, toffs, putting backwards and forwards things that we both know. How unattractive is that, for one thing, but also how closed. And that's, I think it's a really good point you made about the mastery aspect. As long as someone doesn't think in themselves, but as soon as we've got an ego identity, I remember being at an expo once, and this guy walked in and had this T-shirt saying, "I am a healer." And I thought, oh dear, because that's kind of the last person that a healing energy would want to be with, because it's an identity statement, or it could be. And the way he was about it was an identity statement. So it needs to be that we're conduits, as you said, portals through which new perceptions can come, which means we don't flavor them. I love the word transparent. When you break it into 2 parts, it's transparent. So a good parent gives the child roots and wings and gives them good grounding and the ability to fly, but they are their own person. They're not brought into the orbit of the parents, and the parents are saying, this is what you're going to be. because the child has its own spiritual authenticity and power. So transparent to me means new understanding comes in, and we're able to then give the best translation we can of what's in that portal, which it will never be 100%, but it will be our best attempt to do that. And hopefully, and we'd have the view that somebody else can then come in and take that and make it even closer to the truth, great, because what counts is getting there, and being there, being closer to the truth of the purpose of human existence has got to be an improvement than being distracted away from it.
And part of the invitation you're making there is that we now have a world that, as you said earlier, gets so distracted with what I would sometimes describe as celebritocracy. So we used to have the aristocracy.
Yep.
That got replaced with potentially meritocracy, which you could say emerged through the 18th, 19th century, which at another time we'll talk about as the time when the human race was invited to give birth to Homo solaris, the new model of life where each person was invited to unlock their entrepreneurial energies and ideation and potential, but that was mostly captured in commerce and in money making and so on because of the conditioning and the prevailing focus of society and culture and the conditions we run on. And we are now about 150, 170, 200 years out of date or behind in this imaginary evolutionary journey. And you can say that perhaps only the early 2000s, when the idea of the internet and well, everybody getting their channel on YouTube, that was coming online, that was a technology solution that you could equate with the permission of that we're describing as Homo solaris. You can become your own little sun, inspiring others. That's why Homo solaris. But the potential is you can, in the way you're not describing it, you can source original inspiration. You can become a conduit for energy, for perception, for possibility, that where it's not going to get locked around you with your brand identity. That's the celebritocracy capture. We're trying to represent the release of that and in a way, putting this back in the common, not something that is proprietary to the person, not proprietary to us, but has more the universal access to it. And that is part of the impulse in what we are inviting in this exercise.
Yes. And I get the word right.
Celebritocracy.
Celebritocracy. that will belong firmly in the exoteric. So they're not trying to get to the esoteric. They're part of, another name I put to it is the moneyocracy, which is more and more how various countries are living in the United States now, can see it moving more and more. The money is such a powerful player. So that aspect is mostly in the exoteric. And so the celebrity culture in that way, the number of followers, things are based on mass. So that's another interesting feature, is that as we move from the esoteric to the exoteric, we come to greater mass of people and less actual energetic connection to core truth. So the more we get to the esoteric, the less mass, which is very often also why there's less mass of people, but the closer to a more potentized energy. So
and we need to be clear that we're not placing a value judgment, because the bigger system needs popularizers and it needs people that are seeking to break new grounds, and somebody would be listening to this and would be saying, well, why can't you be on both ends of the continuum? And maybe you can, now, but you always, if you are in the very large scale platform, you are facing the challenge of audience capture, and it's a lot more difficult to stay authentic. So that's just an example in that space of how do you stay tethered, not to your personal brand, but to the propelling drive of an inquiry that's perennial, that's eternal, that was here before you and will be here after you are gone, and you are partaking in the journey of unfolding that inquiry by being, for a period, as you suggested, transparent for it.
Yes. And part of why Joanna and I took the name Energy Worlds for what we're doing was adding up the kind of world situation and brewing on it and thinking, what can we actually offer that's the most useful? And what we came to was education about the energetics of how we use our mind, how we use our brain, how we use our heart, the energetics we connect to and what that causes, which I found there's a real lack of understanding of in the world. So that's again, that example of trying to stay with the esoteric and then offer something through the mesoteric into the exoteric, but not keeping the esoteric connection. That's the tricky bit, is not to lose that connection and become only in the mesoteric and the exoteric, but to hold a connection, to bring it into the mesoteric and then transmit it into the exoteric. So you're still in two parts of the three-part system, but creating something that can be helpful and useful in the exoteric realm.
Well, so that's really our invitation, that you come along for the ride with us as we explore current openings, what the world doesn't quite get yet, both, and that as we unfold is that it becomes invitational for other people to put forward to us some inquiries that we may work with, and we see that at least a dozen different topics here to come back to. And sometimes what I think we will try to do is to slow down the conversation and be for a bit more methodical and say, well, so what do you mean when you talk about natural laws and universal principles, and how can one begin to journey to discover these, and why should one bother, and what will be the evidence that you are, as you to use your term, connect and get wired in yourself and get harmonized in yourself with those working principles. How do you know when you are entering that space, and what would be the experiential, embodied, felt, energetic dimension of that experience, and what will that lead to? So that kind of slowing down to going deeper into some of the spaces will, I imagine, be extremely productive and valuable, especially in and through this time of significant change globally.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, Aviv. I think this may be a bit like an overture. You know, before the symphony starts, they play all the little themes that appear later in more depth. We may have unwittingly, we just did this as an experiment, but there's somewhat of an overture in here with all these different parts that we can go to. And I love that idea of inquiries, incoming inquiries, and then taking that live and then discovering what portals open that appear because of those inquiries. That sounds like a really, if we don't know quite what's going to happen next, it's got to make for a more fun journey.
Well, thank you, David, for this unplanned, spontaneous ride. Like riding a wave, you never know where it'll go next. And you know that if you fell off the board, and all you need to do is get rowing again. So there we are rowing and in the water, and let's leave it there, suspended and unfinished.
Fantastic. Great to be with you, Aviv. Until next.
Thank you.